Hello everyone, my name is Anup Sathya and I'm from the University of Chicago. Today I want to talk to you about our paper titled Attention Receipts, Utilizing the Materiality of Receipts to Improve Screen Time Reflection on YouTube. This work was a collaboration with my advisor Ken Nakagaki. The internet is an unbelievably useful tool that massively expands our individual capabilities. But at the same time, there are these nefarious mechanisms lying just underneath the surface that are purely designed to hold your attention so that it can be monetized in some way. Herbert Simon, a Nobel laureate in economics, called this the attention economy. In the attention economy, through some persuasive mechanisms, our attention is volunteered in a complex economical transaction, often without our consent. And these mechanisms are heavily prevalent in apps like YouTube, where even when the usefulness of YouTube subsides, you're often stuck in this loop where you deeply want to do something else, but you're glued to the screen. And when people want to break free from these mechanisms and maintain agency over what they do with their time, they look for external tools because self-control is just not enough and it leads to a lot of failures. Digital solutions exist to help with self-control, and a large percentage of them rely on blocking entire websites or specific features. This takes away the user's agency to a large extent. But in our work, we want to retain user agency. So another approach is self-tracking, which provokes the user to reflect on their usage and change their habits or patterns. But what would self-reflection look like if it was more affective and tangible and a little playful? This is explored by slow technology researchers who specifically design technology aimed at reflection and moments of mental rest. While slow technology tends towards digitally mediated reminiscence and focuses on long-term interactions with the artifact itself, we want to study how materiality and tangibility can play a role in helping us resist against the persuasive mechanisms of the attention economy. So to hopefully generate an affective response centered around the cost metaphor, we built a printer that generates a receipt for what you watch on YouTube and how much time you spend on it. We designed our printer with a mid-century modern aesthetic with the hope that it will fit in with most interior design styles, and we chose a bright color for the front so that users are often reminded of its presence. We also use earthy materials like walnut wood. Other researchers have also used a receipt printer across the years for various purposes, mostly as a physicalization medium. We decided to ask two research questions. One, how does the materiality of the receipt affect the reflection? Can this data just be digital? And two, how does having agency over when the receipt is printed make a difference? You could either have control over when a receipt is printed, or you could automatically get a receipt. Then we designed a study with three conditions. In condition A, participants got the information digitally through a browser plugin that we built. This helps us compare against the materiality of the receipt. In condition B, participants had full control over when they receive a receipt. They click a button on our plugin and a receipt is printed. And in condition C, we pick a random time every day and we print out a receipt. We recruited 6 participants and counterbalanced the conditions, and participants spent about 1 week in each condition. At the end of each week, they had to fill out a small survey and participate in an interview where we talked through how they felt about their YouTube usage that week and their thoughts about the reflection method. Once the interviews were done, we analyzed the data using the reflexive thematic analysis framework. In this presentation, I talk about the major insights that emerged as a result of the analysis and through our design process. But the detailed themes and outcomes are explored in the paper, and I highly encourage you to read it. Circling back to our research questions, one common theme we found in the participant accounts is that they tended to dislike the digital condition because they felt like they already have a lot of digital overload in their lives. Adding another item to this wasn't too helpful. We can see this reflected in this quote by Avery. Participants also mentioned that the digital condition was convenient because they could just click a button and get the data, but it wasn't too meaningful because participants kept forgetting to use it. Surprisingly, Some participants reported that they ended up spending more time on YouTube while they were being more mindful. But they didn't report this as a concern, as this meant that they were spending less time on TikTok, which they call garbage content. Lots of users have digital well-being goals centered around reducing their screen time, and some prior research has shown that a large population are also interested in adjusting the quality. But this highlights the need to not view digital well-being as less screen time is better, because different users have different goals. In one of the most important parts of our inquiry, participants appreciated the materiality of the receipt and the printer's role in different ways. The length of the receipt played an important role. One participant talked about how listening to the printer printing out a really long receipt was kind of ridiculous, and it provoked them to think about how much time they spend on YouTube. Most importantly, this quote here by Jordan highlights the cost metaphor that we tried to invoke in our work. The materiality of the receipt and the cultural memory behind it helped them ground their interactions with technology in a way that they weren't used to. This truly highlights the potential of using affective ways to allow people to reflect on their data. Coming to the agency question, almost all participants enjoyed having agency over when the receipt is printed, and they reported that this method didn't feel as passive as when they didn't have agency. When they had full control, they could click a button and get a receipt, which was very exciting and fun and engaging, but there are some important caveats here. Some participants ended up curating their receipts. For instance, they would go on a slightly embarrassing rabbit hole, and when they didn't want to deal with the reality of watching all of this in the form of a receipt, they would just print a receipt, flush out the data, and throw the receipt away because they didn't want to look at the embarrassing data. The receipt also became a sort of souvenir that they could tailor. Apart from concerns about passivity, participants also reported feelings of surveillance when the receipts were printed randomly. And while this creates a negative perception of the object, participants reported that they engage with the data more deeply and built habits around reflecting on their data. At this point, we discover that there's this tension between how much people enjoy the reflection method itself and how effectively people actually reflect on the data. This has some interesting implications because traditionally in HCI, we prioritize building and maintaining heavily engaging systems that the user ideally only has a positive perception of. But in our case, when engagement with the receipt printer increased, the quality of reflection often dropped. And this tension exists with a lot of digital well-being tools because the tool itself is sort of nagging you and asking you to be different. And so unless it's just right, it's not going to be used. To help designers in similar situations, we list a few design recommendations in our paper that emerged through our interviews, and I'm going to talk about two of them here. One, I know we all want to build good-looking stuff, but in this case, it's extra important because people need more incentive to use a device like this. All the participants enjoyed the design of our object, and they felt like the visual aesthetic of it added to their experience. They felt like they could put it anywhere in the house, and most participants opted to put it in highly visible common spaces. Participants also reported that the printer itself served as a reminder to reflect on their usage of YouTube. Another important aspect is making sure that there is as little friction as possible in the usage of the device itself. We took extra care to make sure that the only thing participants had to do to set up the device was to plug it in and then use a simple interface to connect it to Wi-Fi. Any consistent friction while using the object would mean that people would be less enthusiastic about it. And second, while participants enjoyed having agency over the device, and this is important, perhaps a middle ground can be achieved where participants maintain agency, but there's some room for surprise so that the ultimate goals of the device are not diminished. In conclusion, in today's world, we're pretty much surrounded by digital information. And some novel research in the tangible and material-driven interaction space proposes that we use tangibility and materiality as a conduit for digital information. What we aim to do with our work, and what I want to highly encourage other designers and researchers to pursue, is the potential of using tangibility as resistance against persuasive mechanisms on the internet. What we spend our time on and what we pay attention to is deeply personal and important. Considering how the relentless instant gratification we get from the internet is measurably reducing our mental faculties, it's really important that we as a community help mitigate these less savory aspects of the internet for it to remain a useful and wonderful tool. I'd like to thank my collaborators and colleagues at AxeLab and the other wonderful people and participants that helped make this paper happen. If you're interested in this line of work or if you have questions, please reach out. I'm really happy to talk about it. Thanks for paying attention to this talk.